I never imagined that planning my 63rd birthday dinner would expose the true value my daughter placed on our relationship. But that Thursday night phone call changed everything and taught me that sometimes the greatest inheritance we can leave isn't measured in dollars, but in lessons about respect and consequences. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The grandfather clock in my foyer, a wedding gift from my late husband Thomas, had just chimed 7 when my phone lit up with Jennifer's name. Outside my window, the cherry blossoms in my garden were beginning their annual bloom, their delicate pink petals catching the golden hour sunlight. Spring in Connecticut had always been my favorite season, full of promise and renewal. I'd spent the afternoon finalizing arrangements for my birthday dinner that weekend. Nothing extravagant, just a reservation at Bellini's, the charming Italian restaurant where Thomas had proposed to me 40 years earlier. A place steeped in memories, where the owner still greeted me by name and remembered my preference for their house Chianti. "Mom? It's me." Jennifer's voice sounded oddly formal when I answered, lacking the warmth I always hoped to hear. I settled, deeper into my reading chair, marking my place in my book with an old receipt. "Jennifer, I was just thinking about you. Have you decided what time you'll arrive on Saturday? The reservation is at 7, but I thought you might want to come by the house first so the kids can—" "That's why I'm calling, actually." She cut me off, her tone clipped and businesslike. "About Saturday." Something in her voice made me sit up straighter. "Is everything all right? Are the children sick?" "No, nothing like that," she said quickly. "It's just that, well, we're not going to make it. Derek's boss invited us to his lake house for the weekend. It's a really important opportunity for Derek's career. You understand?" I gripped the phone tighter, my chest tightening. "But it's my birthday dinner, Jennifer. We've had this planned for over a month." "I know, and I'm really sorry. But this just came up and Derek can't say no to Marshall. You know how these things work." I did know. I'd spent 35 years as CFO of a Fortune 500 company before retiring. I knew exactly how these things worked, and I knew that a last-minute lake house invitation wasn't the career-defining moment Jennifer was making it out to be. See, my voice sounded distant to my own ears. "And the kids? Could they perhaps stay with me while you and Derek network?" A weighted pause followed. "Mom, they're really looking forward to swimming and kayaking. Emily's been talking about it all day. But we'll do something when we get back, I promise. Maybe next weekend?" My birthday, like so many other family occasions over the past 5 years since Thomas died, was being pushed aside for something more exciting, more important. Another promise that would evaporate like morning dew once the moment had passed. "I understand," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I hope you all have a wonderful time." "Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Love you." And she was gone, leaving me sitting alone in my reading nook, surrounded by photographs of a family that seemed to have time for everything except me. My name is Margaret Wilson. I built a successful career at Harrington Financial Group, starting as an accountant and rising to chief financial officer before retiring at 58. I raised one daughter, Jennifer, now 36, who married Derek Parker, a corporate lawyer with ambition that outpaced his abilities. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, Emily, 10, and Noah, 7. Both bright, beautiful children I barely know despite living just 18 miles away from them. Thomas, my husband of 38 years, passed away from pancreatic cancer 5 years ago. We'd planned for our retirement meticulously, traveled through Europe, volunteered with Habitat for Humanity, taken cooking classes together. But cancer doesn't respect well-laid plans. I nursed him through 14 months of decline, holding his hand until his final breath. After Thomas died, I threw myself into being the supportive mother and doting grandmother. I showed up whenever Jennifer called, which grew increasingly rare as months passed. I sent thoughtful gifts, remembered every birthday and school event, offered financial support whenever they hinted at needs. I told myself this was natural. Jennifer was busy with her family, her charity committees, her tennis lessons, and book clubs. But as I sat there with my phone in my hand, the setting sun casting long shadows across my living room, I felt something shift inside me. A realization crystallizing after years of willful denial. The phone rang again, startling me. For a heartbeat, I thought perhaps Jennifer had reconsidered, but the caller ID showed Elaine Cooper, my closest friend since college. "Margaret, are we still on for coffee tomorrow?" Elaine's warm voice filled the line. "Yes, of course," I replied, attempting to sound normal. Elaine, perceptive as always, caught the strain in my voice immediately. "What's wrong? You sound upset." Jennifer canceled on my birthday dinner, lake house invitation from Derek's boss, apparently unmissable. "Oh, Margaret." Elaine's sigh held years of witnessed disappointments. "I'm so sorry. That's the third time this year she's canceled plans, isn't it?" "Fourth, actually." I moved to the kitchen, suddenly needing to keep my hands busy. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove with more force than necessary. "But who's counting?" "You should be," Elaine said firmly. "This pattern isn't healthy. Margaret, not for you, and frankly, not for Jennifer either." I leaned against the counter, feeling the cool granite under my palms. "What would you suggest? Begging my adult daughter to spend time with me? Guilt-tripping her about family obligations?" "No," Elaine replied carefully. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But perhaps it's time to examine what you're getting from this relationship versus what you're giving. You've mentioned the trust fund you established for the grandchildren, the down payment for their house, the private school tuition. That's what family does, Elaine. Thomas and I were fortunate. We worked hard and invested well. Of course, I want to share that with Jennifer and her family. Share, yes. But there's a difference between sharing and subsidizing a lifestyle, where you're an afterthought. Her words stung because they touched a truth I'd been avoiding. The kettle whistled, saving me from responding immediately. I prepared my tea methodically. Earl Grey, 1 sugar, splash of milk, a ritual that had comforted me through decades of challenges. "I don't know what to do," I admitted finally, carrying my tea back to my reading chair. "I can't force her to want a relationship with me." "No, but you can stop rewarding behavior that hurts you," Elaine said gently. "When was the last time Jennifer initiated a visit that wasn't connected to a financial discussion or favor?" I tried to recall, sifting through recent memories. Jennifer and Derek dropping by when they needed co-signers for their boat loan. A lunch where the conversation centered around Emily's prestigious ballet academy and its substantial tuition. A Christmas where they stayed for precisely 2 hours before heading to Derek's parents' home for the real celebration. "It's been a while," I conceded. "Tomorrow at coffee, we're going to have a real conversation about this," Elaine said decisively. "No more avoiding the obvious. Bring your financial statements. I want you to see exactly what this relationship is costing you, and I don't just mean emotionally." After hanging up, I sat with my cooling tea, watching darkness settle over my garden. The house felt especially empty tonight, the silence punctuated only by the steady tick of Thomas's beloved grandfather clock. I could almost hear what he would say if he were here. "Maggie, you deserve better than this. We both know it." I rose and walked to my home office, a room lined with cherry bookshelves and dominated by an antique partner's desk where Thomas and I had often worked side by side. The desk's right-hand drawer stuck slightly. It always had, but opened with a firm tug to reveal a neatly labeled folder. Jennifer and Family Financial Matters. Inside was a meticulously maintained record of every dollar I'd given Jennifer, and Derek since their wedding 12 years ago. Thomas had insisted on keeping these records, not from stinginess, but from his business-minded insistence on clarity. Generosity should always be intentional, he'd often said, never accidental or coerced. I spread the documents across the desk's leather inlay. The numbers told a story more eloquent than any conversation with my daughter ever could. The down payment for their 5,200-square-foot home in Oak Ridge Heights, $320,000, annual private, school tuition for both children, $56,000. The emergency fund contributions that somehow never seemed to reduce their credit card debt, approximately $15,000 annually for the past 5 years. The luxury SUV I'd purchased outright when Jennifer complained her crossover wasn't projecting the right image for school drop-offs, $83,000. Country club membership I maintained for them because networking is everything in Derek's field, $32,000 annually. Special investment account established for their retirement, separate from the grandchildren's trust, currently valued at approximately $450,000. All told, I had given them well over $1. $2 million in the 5 years since Thomas died, nearly a third of my liquid assets. And that didn't include the jewelry, art, and antiques I'd already transferred to Jennifer's possession, pieces that had been in my family for generations. What had I received in return? Canceled dinners, abbreviated holiday visits, phone calls. That lasted just long enough to make a request, rarely to check on my well-being. The gradual separation from my grandchildren as their schedules became too full of activities to include time with Grandma. I closed the folder and returned it to the drawer, then opened my laptop. With a few clicks, I accessed my password manager and found the contact information for Sarah Reynolds, my financial advisor who had helped Thomas and me build our considerable estate. I composed a brief email. Sarah, I hope this finds you well. I need to schedule a comprehensive review of my estate plan and current financial arrangements as soon as possible. Specifically, I wish to discuss significant changes to beneficiary designations and ongoing financial support structures. Would tomorrow afternoon work for your schedule? This matter is somewhat urgent. Best regards, Margaret Wilson. After sending the email, I felt a curious lightness, as if I'd set down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for miles. I wasn't entirely sure what changes I would make, but I knew with sudden clarity that changes were necessary, not out of spite or revenge, but out of self-preservation and perhaps as a final lesson in consequences that I had failed to teach my daughter when she was young. Sarah's response arrived within minutes, confirming a 2 p.m. appointment the following day. I closed my laptop and prepared for bed, moving through my evening routine with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without checking my phone one last time to see if Jennifer had texted or called. The following morning dawned bright and clear. I dressed with particular care for my coffee with Elaine, a sage green, cashmere sweater, tailored charcoal slacks, pearl earrings Thomas had given me for our 30th anniversary. At 63, I still maintained the disciplined fitness regimen that had been part of my corporate routine. My silver hair cut in a sleek bob that framed a face with more laugh lines than frown lines, despite recent disappointments. The Morning Brew Cafe was bustling with Friday activity when I arrived. Elaine waved from our usual corner table, 2 steaming lattes already waiting. At 65, Elaine radiated the vitality of someone decades younger, her trademark red, glasses matching her still auburn hair that she refused to color. Earned every damn strand, as she liked to say. You look better than I expected, she said as I sat down. Righteous indignation agrees with me, apparently, I replied with a small smile. Did you bring the financials? I patted my leather portfolio. Yes, though I already reviewed everything. Last night. It's substantial. Elaine nodded, taking a sip of her latte. I suspected as much. You've always been generous to a fault, Margaret. I thought I was being a good mother, I said quietly. Ensuring Jennifer and her family had every advantage. There's a difference between providing advantages and enabling entitlement, Elaine said. She'd never been one to soften difficult truths. It was why I valued her friendship so deeply. Now show me the damage. For the next hour, we reviewed the documents together. Elaine, a retired corporate attorney, asked pointed questions about each transaction, each arrangement, each open-ended commitment I'd made. When we finished, she sat back with a low whistle. Margaret, this isn't sustainable, financially or emotionally. You're essentially bankrolling their entire lifestyle while being treated as an afterthought. I know. The admission felt both painful and freeing. I have an appointment with Sarah Reynolds at 2 to discuss restructuring everything. Good. What are you thinking? I traced the rim of my coffee cup, organizing my thoughts. I'm not going to act rashly out of hurt feelings. That's not who I am. But I do need to establish clear boundaries, financial and personal. Such as the private school tuition. I'll honor that commitment through the end of the school year, but then it stops. The children can attend the excellent public schools in their district like most of their peers. Elaine nodded encouragingly. The country club membership renewal is due next month. I won't be paying it. And the big items? I took a deep breath. The trust fund for the grandchildren stays, but with modified terms. They'll access the funds at 25 instead of 18, and only for education, first home purchase, or starting a business, not just handed over as cash. And I'll be the sole trustee until then. Smart. As for Jennifer and Derek's inheritance, I hesitated, then committed to the thought that had been forming since last night. I'm going to restructure my will and estate plan. Currently, Jennifer is set to inherit everything outright. I'm going to establish a foundation instead, one that will fund causes Thomas and I believed in. Jennifer will have a seat on the board but won't control the assets directly. Elaine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's not punitive, Margaret. That's responsible stewardship of what you and Thomas built together. There's more, I said. The monthly transfers to their household account. I'm stopping those immediately. And I'm going to ask them to begin repaying the emergency funds, perhaps not all at once, but through a structured arrangement. They won't like that. No, I agreed. They won't. But if there's one thing I learned in business, it's that you teach people how to treat you. I've been teaching Jennifer and Derek that my time, my feelings, and my resources are less valuable than theirs. That needs to change. Elaine studied me for a moment, her expression softening. You know this might fundamentally alter your relationship with them. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. Yes, but the relationship we have isn't healthy anyway. At least this way, there's a chance for something more authentic to develop, eventually. As we prepared to leave, Elaine gave me a fierce hug. I'm proud of you, Margaret. This isn't easy, but it's necessary. Call me after your meeting with Sarah? I will, I promised. The offices of Reynolds Financial Advisors occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building with views of Oak Ridge Park. Sarah Reynolds greeted me warmly, ushering me into her corner office where floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in natural light. It's always a pleasure to see you, Margaret, she said, settling behind her desk. Though I must admit, your email suggested something more urgent than our usual quarterly review. Yes, I agreed, placing my portfolio on her desk. I need to make significant changes to my financial arrangements, some immediately, others as part of a comprehensive restructuring of my estate plan. Sarah's expression remained professional, but I detected a flicker of surprise. She'd managed my finances for 15 years and knew how methodical and measured I typically was about financial decisions. Of course. What specifically are you looking to change? For the next hour, we worked through each item on my list. Sarah asked clarifying questions, offered alternatives where appropriate, and took detailed notes. Unlike Elaine, she didn't probe into my personal motivations. Our relationship was financial, not emotional. But her experience with family wealth transfers likely gave her insights into what might be driving my decisions. "These are substantial changes, Margaret," she said when we'd finished outlining everything. "I want to make sure you've considered the potential repercussions." "I have," I assured her. "This isn't an impulsive reaction. It's actually long overdue." She nodded, tapping her pen against her notepad. "The immediate changes, canceling the automatic transfers, removing your daughter as an authorized user on your accounts, and declining the country club renewal. Those we can implement today. The estate restructuring and trust modifications will take a bit more time. I'll need to coordinate with your attorney." "That's fine. I'll contact Harold this afternoon to let him know you'll be reaching out." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind my asking, are you all right? It's not like you to make such sweeping changes all at once." The question caught me off guard. In my corporate life, I'd been known for my composure, rarely revealing personal struggles that might be interpreted as weakness. But retirement had softened those sharp edges somewhat. "I'm recalibrating," I said after a moment. "Learning that generosity without boundaries isn't really generosity at all. It's something else, something less healthy." Sarah nodded, seeming to understand, more than I'd explicitly stated. "I see. Well, you can rest assured that we'll implement these changes exactly as you've outlined them. Is there anything else you need from me today?" "Actually, yes," I said, remembering something I'd considered during my sleepless night. "I'd like information about establishing a charitable foundation, something that could eventually manage a significant portion of my estate." "Of course. I have some materials I can send you, and I can connect you with specialists who focus on philanthropic planning. Any particular causes you're interested in supporting?" "Education for first-generation college students, medical research, pancreatic cancer specifically, and arts programs for underserved communities. The causes Thomas and I had always supported and had hoped Jennifer would eventually champion." Sarah made a note. "I'll put together a comprehensive package for you, and Margaret—" She hesitated, then continued. "Whatever prompted these changes, I want you to know that you're making sound financial decisions. Your late husband would approve." The mention of Thomas brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Sarah. That means a great deal to me." By the time I left Sarah's office, it was nearing 4 o'clock. The first official actions had been taken. The financial ties that had bound me to Jennifer and Derek's excessive lifestyle were severed or in the process of being restructured. The foundation was laid for a more comprehensive overhaul of my estate plan. I should have felt anxious, or at least uncertain. Instead, I felt strangely liberated, as if I'd finally addressed a long-neglected problem that had been draining my energy for years. I decided to walk through Oak Ridge Park before heading home, enjoying the spring afternoon and the sensation of taking control of my own life again. My phone rang as I settled onto a park bench overlooking the duck pond. Jennifer's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but that felt cowardly. Whatever was coming, I would face it directly. "Hello, Jennifer," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Mom?" She sounded agitated. "I just got the strangest call from Riverside Country Club. They said you've declined to renew our family membership. There must be some mistake." So it had begun more quickly than I'd anticipated. The country club's membership director certainly hadn't wasted any time. "No mistake," I said calmly. "I've decided not to renew the membership." A stunned silence followed. "But why? Is there something wrong with your finances? Are you having problems I don't know about?" The immediate assumption that only financial distress could explain my decision was telling. It hadn't occurred to her that I might simply choose to stop subsidizing their lifestyle. "My finances are perfectly fine, Jennifer. I've simply reassessed my spending priorities." Mom, this is our social circle. These are Derek's colleagues and clients. We can't just stop being members. What would people think? I imagine they'd think you're paying for your own membership like most adults do, I replied, surprised by my own directness. Another silence, longer this time. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice had shifted from concerned to calculating. If this is about Saturday, I told you we have to go to Marshall's lake house. It's important for Derek's career. We can't just... This isn't about Saturday, I interrupted. Though of course it was, at least partly. This is about establishing healthier boundaries between us. Boundaries? She repeated, as if I'd used a foreign word. What are you talking about? A family of ducks glided across the pond before me, the mother leading 4 tiny ducklings, in a perfect line. I watched them while gathering my thoughts. Jennifer, over the past 5 years, I've contributed over $1 million to supporting your family's lifestyle. The house, the schools, the club, the cars, the emergency funds. During that same period, you've canceled more visits with me than you've kept, consistently prioritized other social engagements over family time, and gradually restricted my access to my grandchildren. That's not fair, she protested. We're busy. The kids have activities, Derek has work commitments, I have my volunteer obligations. Yes, everyone is busy, I acknowledged. But we make time for what we value, and it's become increasingly clear that time with me isn't something you value particularly highly. So this is punishment? Her voice rose sharply. You're cutting us off because you're feeling neglected? That's emotional blackmail. No, Jennifer. This is a consequence, not a punishment. And it's not emotional blackmail to stop financing a lifestyle where I'm an afterthought. I can't believe you're doing this, she said, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine shock. After everything Dad and I meant to each other, how could you... Don't. My voice hardened. Don't invoke your father to manipulate me. Thomas would be heartbroken to see how our relationship has deteriorated. He valued family above everything, but he also believed in respect and reciprocity. So what now? She demanded. What exactly are these consequences you're imposing? I've canceled the country club membership and the monthly transfers to your household account, I said evenly. I've removed you as an authorized user on my credit cards. The children's private school tuition will be paid through the end of this academic year, after which you and Derek will need to make other arrangements. You can't be serious, she whispered. I'm entirely serious, Jennifer. I'm also restructuring my estate plan to reflect these new boundaries. The details will be forthcoming, but you should know that significant changes are being made. The line went silent for so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she spoke in a voice I barely recognized, cold and brittle. I see. Well, thank you for your honesty, Mother. I suppose we now know exactly what your love costs. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there holding my phone, watching the duck family complete their circuit of the pond. Jennifer's parting shot had been designed to wound, to cast me as the mercenary one measuring love in dollars and cents. The irony wasn't lost on me. I took a deep breath of the spring air, fragrant with flowering trees and fresh grass. My daughter had just revealed precisely how she viewed our relationship, as a transaction, an entitlement, a financial arrangement rather than a bond of genuine affection and mutual respect. It hurt, but the clarity was valuable. I couldn't rebuild what had never truly existed in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine. How did it go with Sarah? I replied simply, everything is in motion. Jennifer already knows about the country club. Full meltdown initiated. Her response came quickly. Coming over with wine and takeout. 6 p.m., no arguments. I smiled despite the heaviness in my heart. This wouldn't be an easy road, but I wouldn't be walking it alone. And for the first time in years, I was walking in a direction of my own choosing. As I headed back to my car, I realized I still needed to make plans for my birthday tomorrow. A dinner alone at Bellini's held little appeal now. Perhaps I would do something entirely different, something I'd never have considered when organizing my life around Jennifer's potential availability. The thought was simultaneously melancholy and exhilarating. 63 years old, and I was finally learning that sometimes the most valuable gift you can give yourself is the courage to recognize when a relationship has become a one-way street, and the strength to close that road and forge a new path forward. The morning of my birthday dawned with unexpected brilliance, sunlight streaming through my bedroom curtains in golden ribbons. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the birds outside, my window and the distant hum of a lawnmower. 63 years old today. Not how I had planned to mark the occasion, but here we were. My phone remained conspicuously silent. No birthday text from Jennifer, no video call with the grandchildren singing off-key, no flowers delivered with Derek's corporate card attached. The absence was deafening in its own way, but I refused to let it define my day. I slipped into my robe and made my way downstairs, where I prepared a proper birthday breakfast, something I rarely indulged in. French press coffee, fresh berries, and my mother's recipe for Belgian waffles that Thomas had always requested on special occasions. I ate at the small table in my garden, surrounded by the spring flowers I had tenderly cultivated, finding unexpected pleasure in this solitary celebration. Elaine called precisely at 9, as she had on every birthday since our college days. "Happy birthday, you magnificent woman," she declared without preamble. "What's the plan for today, now that Bellini's is off the table?" "I'm still figuring that out," I admitted, gathering my breakfast dishes. "But I'm leaning towards that exhibition at the Hamilton Gallery we talked about. The one with the Japanese pottery." "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 2, and I've made dinner reservations at Maison for 7. James is joining us." I paused, my coffee cup halfway to the sink. "James? Your neighbor James?" "The very same. Distinguished retired architect, widower of 3 years, tennis player, makes an excellent martini. That James." "Elaine, are you matchmaking on my birthday?" "I prefer creating opportunities for connection between compatible adults, but call it what you will. Wear that midnight blue dress that makes you look like Lauren Bacall." I laughed despite myself. "I haven't agreed to dinner yet, but you will, because it's your birthday, and you deserve to be celebrated properly. James is good company, Margaret. No pressure, no expectations, just good conversation and excellent food." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen contemplating this unexpected turn. The last thing I wanted was a pity date arranged by a well-meaning friend. But Elaine wasn't the type to push unwanted connections. If she thought James and I might enjoy each other's company, she was probably right. My contemplation was interrupted by the sharp trill of the doorbell. Setting down my cup, I crossed to the foyer, briefly checking my appearance in the hall mirror before opening the door. A young courier stood on my porch, holding a thick manila envelope. "Margaret Wilson? Yes, that's me. Special delivery, signature required." He thrust an electronic pad towards me. I signed and accepted the envelope, noting the return address of Harrington and Diaz, my longtime legal firm. Harold must have worked quickly after Sarah contacted him yesterday. Returning to the kitchen, I opened the envelope and spread its contents across the island counter. Draft amendments to my will, trust modifications for the grandchildren's funds, preliminary paperwork for establishing the charitable foundation, and a personal note from Harold Diaz himself. "Margaret, Sarah briefed me on your situation. Everything is prepared according to your instructions, requiring only your final review and signature. I've taken the liberty of scheduling a notary to meet us at your home tomorrow at 10 a.m. if that's convenient. On a personal note, having worked with you and Thomas for over 20 years, I believe these changes reflect the values you both championed throughout your lives. Boundaries are sometimes the greatest gift we can offer those who have lost their way. With respect and admiration, I felt a surge of gratitude for Harold's efficiency and understanding. The documents before me represented not just financial restructuring, but a reclamation of my own agency. I would review them carefully later, but for now, I had a birthday to celebrate, on my own terms. By the time Elaine arrived to take me to the gallery, I had showered, styled my hair, and chosen a casual but elegant outfit of tailored linen pants and a silk blouse in a shade of coral that Thomas had always said brought out the warmth in my complexion. I wore his mother's pearls, a reminder of family legacy that transcended current disappointments. "You look wonderful," Elaine said approvingly as I slid into the passenger seat of her silver Audi. "How does it feel to be 63 and fabulous?" "Surprisingly liberating," I replied with a small smile. "I've spent the morning reviewing legal documents instead of waiting by the phone for a call that isn't coming." Elaine navigated through the tree-lined streets of Oak Ridge with practiced ease. "Any word from Hurricane Jennifer yet?" "Radio silence, though I expect the storm will make landfall eventually." "Let it come," Elaine said firmly. "You've weathered worse." The Hamilton Gallery's Japanese pottery exhibition proved to be exactly what I needed: serene, thoughtful arrangements of pieces that embodied the philosophy of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. I lost myself in the quiet contemplation of vessels that had been broken and repaired with gold, emerging more beautiful for having been damaged. "There's something poetic about this, isn't there?" A deep voice observed beside me as I studied a particularly striking tea bowl. The Japanese call it kintsugi, honoring the breaks instead of hiding them. I turned to find a tall, silver-haired man in a well-cut navy blazer regarding the pottery with genuine interest. His eyes, when they met mine, were a surprising shade of green-blue, like sea glass. "I was just thinking the same thing," I replied. "It's a powerful metaphor." He smiled, revealing laugh lines that spoke of a life with more joy than sorrow. "James Bennett," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "You must be Margaret. Elaine mentioned we might cross paths here today." So much for the spontaneous meeting at dinner. I shot a glance across the gallery where Elaine was suddenly very absorbed in a display of calligraphy brushes. "Subtlety isn't her strong suit, is it?" I said, shaking his hand. "Not remotely, but I find that refreshing at our age, don't you? So much of life gets wasted on indirection and pretense." There was something disarming about his forthright manner. "I suppose it does," I agreed, though I wasn't expecting to meet Elaine's dinner guest quite so orchestratedly. James laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Full disclosure. I asked Elaine if I could join you both at the exhibition. Dinner seemed too formal for a first meeting, and art galleries have better escape routes if the conversation goes poorly." His honesty surprised a laugh out of me. Very pragmatic. "I've found that being direct saves time. Life feels shorter these days." He gestured to the pottery display. "Would you mind if I walked through the exhibition with you? I'm an architect by trade, but Japanese aesthetics have always fascinated me." I hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that." We moved through the gallery at a companionable pace, discovering shared interests in design, travel, and surprisingly obscure British detective novels. James was knowledgeable without being pedantic, attentive without being intrusive, and possessed a dry wit that repeatedly drew genuine laughter from me, something I realized had become rare in recent years. By the time we'd completed our circuit of the exhibition, Elaine had disappeared entirely, leaving a text that she'd meet us at Maison at 7. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost charming. "I think we've been abandoned," I observed, showing James the text. "Shameless," he agreed with a smile. "But I can't say I'm disappointed. Would you consider having a coffee with me at the Gallery Cafe before dinner? I promise to have you at Maison by 7, regardless of whether you find me hopelessly boring by then." The afternoon light caught the silver in his hair, and something in his expression, a blend of confidence and vulnerability, made my decision easy. "I'd like that," I said for the second time that day, surprising myself with how much I meant it. We settled at a corner table in the cafe, where James insisted that coffee and cake were non-negotiable birthday requirements. The hours passed, with remarkable ease, our conversation flowing from professional accomplishments to favorite travel memories, to the challenges of adjusting to life without a spouse. "Catherine died 3 years ago," James said, his expression softening at the mention of his late wife. Stroke, sudden and unexpected. We were planning a trip to Portugal the following month. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. The suddenness must have been its own kind of shock. He nodded. "Different from your experience with Thomas, I imagine." "Elaine mentioned he had cancer?" "Pancreatic, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. In some ways, the time was a gift. We could say everything that needed saying. In other ways..." I trailed off, remembering the grueling final weeks. "It's its own kind of cruelty," James finished quietly. "Watching someone you love suffer, powerless to change the outcome." Yes, exactly. Few people truly understood that complicated grief, the simultaneous gratitude for additional time, and the guilt over sometimes wishing for a swifter end to the suffering. A comfortable silence settled between us, neither of us feeling compelled to fill it with platitudes. Finally, James glanced at his watch. "We should probably head to Maison if we're going to meet Elaine on time," he said. "May I drive you? My car's just in the west lot." "That would be fine," I agreed, gathering my purse and the small bag containing a pottery piece I'd purchased, a kintsugi bowl whose golden repairs formed a pattern like branching lightning across its surface. James's car, a well-maintained Volvo sedan, smelled faintly of leather and cedar. As we drove through the early evening streets of Oak Ridge, I found myself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the intelligent brow, hands steady on the wheel. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet confidence that didn't demand acknowledgement. "Margaret," he said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I want to be clear about something. I've enjoyed our conversation immensely, but I understand this is a complicated day for you. Elaine mentioned some family tensions, and the last thing I want is to intrude on what should be your personal celebration." His consideration caught me off guard. Most people would have politely ignored the elephant in the room, my conspicuous lack of family on my birthday. "Thank you for saying that," I replied carefully. "It is a complicated day, but not in the way you might think. It's actually been quite clarifying." He glanced at me with interest. "Clarifying?" "Yes. Sometimes it takes a significant disappointment to realize that what you've been holding on to isn't what you thought it was." I smoothed an invisible wrinkle from my pants. "Today, I'm celebrating more than just turning 63. I'm celebrating the decision to stop accepting scraps from a relationship that should be a feast." James nodded slowly as he turned onto the street where Maison was located. "That's an eloquent way to describe a painful realization." "Years of corporate communications training," I said with a small smile. "Never say we're downsizing when you can say we're optimizing operational efficiency." He laughed as he pulled into a parking space. "Well, for what it's worth, I think 63 looks remarkable on you, and whoever is offering scraps instead of feast clearly doesn't recognize what's on their table." The compliment, delivered without artifice, brought unexpected warmth to my cheeks as we exited the car. Before we could head into the restaurant, my phone rang, Jennifer's ringtone. I hesitated, my hand on the door handle. "You should take that," James said gently. "I'll let Elaine know we've arrived. Take your time." He slipped inside, leaving me standing in the soft glow of the restaurant's exterior lights. I took a steadying breath and answered the call. "Hello, Jennifer." "Happy birthday, Mom." Her voice was strained, lacking any genuine warmth. I hope you're having a nice day. I am, thank you. I kept my tone neutral, neither encouraging nor dismissive. A pause stretched between us, awkward and telling. Look, Mom, about yesterday. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Derek and I have been talking, and we feel there's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated, not making it a question. Yes, we've always valued our relationship with you, and we're concerned that you might be feeling, I don't know, isolated or depressed since Dad died. Sometimes that can lead to impulsive decisions. The subtle condescension in her tone was remarkable. In Jennifer's revised narrative, I wasn't setting healthy boundaries. I was having some sort of emotional breakdown. I appreciate your concern, I said evenly, but I can assure you, my decisions are neither impulsive nor the result of depression. They're the product of careful consideration and long overdue clarity. Mom, please. Her voice took on an edge of frustration. You can't just suddenly cut us off financially without any warning. We have commitments, expectations. The kids' school tuitions, the club dues, our summer plans, all of which you and Derek are perfectly capable of handling yourselves, I pointed out. Your combined income last year was over $400,000, Jennifer. Most families manage quite well, on far less. That's not the point, she exclaimed, abandoning the concerned daughter pretense entirely. The point is that you've always helped us maintain a certain lifestyle, and now you're vindictively withdrawing that support because of one missed dinner. One missed dinner, I repeated softly. Is that really what you think this is about? What else would it be about? We had to cancel your birthday plans. I said I was sorry. And now you're punishing us by threatening our financial security and changing your will? It's disproportionate and cruel. I gazed up at the deepening twilight, where the first stars were beginning to appear. How had we arrived at such different understandings of our relationship? How had my daughter become someone who could reduce years of emotional neglect to one missed dinner and view my financial support as an entitlement rather than a gift? Jennifer, I said finally, this isn't about punishment. It's about recognition. I've recognized that our relationship has become fundamentally imbalanced. I give time, attention, emotional energy, financial support, and you take, offering the bare minimum in return. That's not healthy for either of us. So you're teaching me a lesson? At 63, you've suddenly decided to play the strict mother you never were when I was growing up? The accusation stung, partly because it contained a kernel of truth. Thomas and I had given Jennifer everything, rarely requiring her to face consequences or delays in gratification. Had we contributed to the entitled adult she'd become? Perhaps I am, I acknowledged. Though I see it more as teaching myself, a lesson about the difference between generosity and enabling. Fine, her voice hardened. If that's how you want to frame it. But don't expect us to just accept these changes without pushback. Derek's already talking to his cousin who practices family law. There are protections for adult children against capricious disinheritance, you know. Of course, Derek would immediately think of legal challenges rather than behavioral changes. I'm aware of the legal landscape, Jennifer. Nothing I'm doing is capricious or without sound reasoning. But by all means, consult with Derek's cousin if it makes you feel better. Through the restaurant window, I could see Elaine and James seated at a corner table, engaged in conversation. Elaine glanced up, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I held up one finger, just a moment longer. Is there anything else, Jennifer? I'm actually about to have dinner with friends. Friends, she repeated, as if the concept of me having an independent social life was foreign to her. On your birthday? I thought you'd be upset about not having family around. I've learned that family is defined by more than just DNA, I said, surprising myself with the realization as I spoke it. It's defined by consistent care, mutual respect, and genuine presence in each other's lives. Meaning what? That we're not your real family anymore because we missed your birthday dinner? I sighed, suddenly weary of the circular conversation. Meaning that I'm broadening my definition of meaningful connection beyond an increasingly strained relationship with you and Derek. Now, I really do need to go. My dinner companions are waiting. Wait, Mom? Jennifer's voice took on a note of panic, perhaps finally registering that I wasn't going to capitulate. What about the kids? They were asking about you this morning. They made cards for your birthday and everything. The mention of Emily and Noah sent a pang through my heart. The children were innocent in all this, yet they were inevitably affected by the choices their parents made. I would love to see the children, Jennifer. My issue has never been with them. You're welcome to bring them for a visit anytime. My door is always open to them. And will you reconsider the school tuition? They love Westfield Academy. It would be devastating for them to have to leave their friends and teachers. And there it was, the real purpose of her call. Not to wish me a happy birthday or repair our relationship, but to negotiate continued financial support through emotional leverage. As I said yesterday, I'll honor the tuition commitment through the end of this school year. After that, you and Derek will need to make decisions based on your own financial priorities. A long silence followed, filled with unspoken recriminations and disappointments. Finally, Jennifer spoke in a voice that sounded more like the little girl I remembered than the polished society woman she'd become. I don't understand why you're doing this, Mom. What do you want from me? The question, asked in genuine bewilderment, revealed the depth of our disconnect. She truly didn't see the years of canceled plans, abbreviated visits, and emotional distance as problematic. In her mind, as long as she made occasional appearances and acknowledged major holidays, she was fulfilling her daughterly duties. What I want, Jennifer, is a relationship where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. Where plans with me aren't the first to be canceled when something more appealing comes along. Where my grandchildren know me as more than the lady who sends generous gifts on their birthdays and Christmas. That's not fair. Perhaps not, I conceded, but it's honest. Now, I really do need to go. We can continue this conversation another time if you'd like. Before she could protest further, I ended the call and turned off my phone completely, something I hadn't done in years. Whatever messages or calls might come through this evening could wait. Tonight was for celebrating my birthday, my newfound clarity, and perhaps the beginning of connections based on genuine mutual interest rather than obligation or advantage. As I entered the restaurant, the maitre d' directed me to the corner table where Elaine and James waited. Elaine studied my expression with the practiced eye of a decades-long friend. "Hurricane Jennifer made landfall, I take it?" she asked, as I slid into my seat. "More like a preliminary storm surge," I replied, unfolding my napkin. "The full hurricane is still gathering strength offshore." James signaled a waiter. "I think this calls for champagne, if you're amenable. Every birthday deserves a proper toast, especially one that coincides with reclaiming your power." The waiter appeared with a bottle already in an ice bucket, suggesting that James had anticipated this moment. As the cork was released with a discreet pop and 3 flutes were filled with golden bubbles, I felt a wave of unexpected emotion. Not grief or anger or regret, but something lighter, a sense of possibility. "A toast," Elaine declared, raising her glass. "To Margaret Wilson, executive extraordinaire, loyal friend, boundary-establishing badass, and the most elegant 63-year-old in Connecticut." "To Margaret," James echoed, his sea-glass eyes holding mine with warmth and admiration. "May this new year bring you everything you truly deserve." As our glasses clinked and the first sip of champagne sparkled on my tongue, I realized that, for the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be, with people who genuinely wanted to be with me, not for my financial support or what I could provide, but for the simple pleasure of my company. The evening unfolded with delicious food, easy conversation, and more laughter than I'd experienced in months. James proved to be as engaging over dinner as he had been at the gallery, interested in my opinions, respectful of my experience, and refreshingly direct about his own life. By the time dessert arrived, a chocolate soufflé with a single candle that the entire restaurant staff presented with a graceful rendition of "Happy Birthday," I felt more celebrated than I would have at a strained family dinner where my presence was a checkbox on my daughter's list of obligations. After dinner, James insisted on driving me home, despite Elaine's transparent attempts to extricate herself from our threesome. "I'm perfectly capable of getting myself home," Elaine declared, with faux indignation when we reached the valet stand. "My Lyft app works just fine, and I've had far too much champagne to drive. James, be a gentleman and see Margaret safely to her door." Before either of us could protest, she had hugged me fiercely, whispered, "He's a good one," in my ear, and disappeared into a waiting rideshare vehicle, leaving us standing somewhat awkwardly on the sidewalk. "She's subtle as a sledgehammer," James observed with a wry smile. "Always has been," I agreed. "But you don't need to drive me home. I can easily call a car." "I'd like to, if you'll allow it," he said. "It would be a fitting end to what has been, for me at least, a surprisingly wonderful day." There was sincerity in his voice that decided me. "Then I accept. Thank you." The drive to my home was peaceful, the streets of Oak Ridge quiet under a canopy of stars. James kept the conversation light, asking about my neighborhood and commenting on the historic architecture we passed. When we pulled into my driveway, the security lights illuminated the front of my colonial home, the garden I'd spent countless hours nurturing, the white wicker furniture on the wide front porch where Thomas and I had spent so many summer evenings. "Your home suits you," James observed as he walked me to the door. "Elegant but inviting. Classic without being stuffy." "Thank you," I said, surprised by how much the simple compliment pleased me. "Thomas and I bought it when Jennifer started kindergarten. We restored most of it ourselves over the years." We reached the front steps, and I turned to face him, suddenly uncertain of the proper protocol. It had been nearly 40 years since I'd navigated the end of an evening with someone new. James seemed to sense my hesitation. "I had a wonderful time today, Margaret. I'd like to see you again if you're open to that. Perhaps dinner next week, or a concert at the Oak Ridge Symphony. They're performing Beethoven's Seventh on Friday." His directness was refreshing. No games, no ambiguity, just straightforward interest. "I'd like that," I said, realizing I truly meant it. "The symphony sounds lovely." He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes and softening his features. "Excellent. I'll call you tomorrow to arrange the details if that's all right." "It is." He took my hand and raised it gently to his lips in a gesture that should have felt old-fashioned, but somehow seemed perfectly natural coming from him. "Happy birthday, Margaret. I hope this year brings you every happiness you deserve." As his car disappeared down the street, I stood for a moment on my porch, keys in hand, absorbing the events of the day. My 63rd birthday, a day that had begun in solitude and disappointment, had somehow transformed into one of the most affirming and enjoyable birthdays I'd had in years. I'd spent the day exactly as I wished, in the company of people who genuinely valued my presence. I'd set clear boundaries with Jennifer. I'd initiated changes to my financial arrangements that reflected my values rather than others' expectations. And I'd met someone who intrigued and attracted me, awakening possibilities I'd thought were long behind me. Inside, I moved through my evening routine with a sense of calm purpose, preparing for the morning's meeting with Harold and the notary. The legal documents waited on my desk, ready for final review and signature. They represented not just a restructuring of material assets, but a reclaiming of personal agency, a declaration that my life and resources would be directed according to my values, not manipulated by others' sense of entitlement. As I settled into bed, I realized that the pain of Jennifer's rejection, both the missed birthday dinner and the deeper pattern it represented, hadn't disappeared. But it had been put into perspective, transformed from a devastating blow to a clarifying moment that had prompted long overdue changes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Jennifer and Derek wouldn't accept these changes without resistance. There would be accusations, emotional manipulation, perhaps even legal threats. The grandchildren would be caught in the middle, their access to me potentially limited by parents who viewed relationship as leverage. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt equal to whatever might come. I had rediscovered my own strength, the same determination and clarity that had propelled me through a successful career in a male-dominated field, that had sustained me through Thomas's illness and death, that had been temporarily obscured, but never extinguished by my desire to maintain family harmony at any cost. As sleep claimed me, I carried with me the image of the kintsugi bowl I'd purchased, broken, repaired with gold, and ultimately more beautiful and valuable for having been damaged. Perhaps the same could be true of a life, of relationships. Perhaps this breaking was necessary for a more authentic wholeness to emerge. The scratch of pen on paper had never sounded so final, or so liberating. In Harold Diaz's presence, along with a notary who maintained a respectful silence, I signed document after document, initialing each page with steady hands. The morning sunlight streamed through my office windows, illuminating the papers that would reshape my financial legacy and perhaps my family relationships. "That's the last one," Harold said, accepting the final document and adding it to the organized stack. "The foundation paperwork will take another few weeks to process through the state, but everything else is effective immediately. The trust modifications, the will amendments, the power of attorney changes, all done." "Thank you, Harold," I said, watching as the notary methodically stamped and signed each document. "I appreciate you expediting this." Harold, who had been my attorney for over 20 years, regarded me with the careful assessment of someone who had witnessed countless family financial reckonings. "How are you feeling about all this, Margaret?" I considered the question as the notary packed up her supplies. "Certain," I replied finally. "Like I'm correcting a course that veered off track so gradually I didn't notice until we were miles from where we should have been." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's often how these situations develop. Incremental accommodations that suddenly reveal themselves as a pattern of imbalance. After the notary departed, Harold and I sat in my sunroom with coffee, reviewing the practical implications of what we'd just formalized. "Jennifer will receive formal notification about the trust modifications next week," he explained. "My office will send similar documentation to the schools regarding the tuition payments ending after this term. Everything else, the monthly, transfers, the country club membership, the credit card authorizations, those are already terminated as of your meeting with Sarah." "And the foundation?" Harold's expression warmed. "The Thomas and Margaret Wilson Foundation for Education, Arts, and Medical Research is officially in the formation process. Once established, it will be the primary beneficiary of your estate, with Jennifer receiving the house, a fixed cash bequest, and some personal items." "And the grandchildren's trusts?" "Modified as requested. You remain sole trustee until they turn 25, with the funds restricted to education, first, home purchase, or business startup. Jennifer and Derek can't access that money under any circumstances." I sipped my coffee, absorbing the finality of what we'd accomplished. In just 24 hours, I had fundamentally restructured financial arrangements that had been in place for years. The sense of empowerment was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. "What should I expect from Jennifer and Derek when they receive the formal notifications?" I asked. Harold set down his cup, folding his hands on the table. "Based on my experience, initial anger, followed by attempts to negotiate, possibly through their own legal representation. If that fails, emotional manipulation, using the grandchildren, invoking Thomas's memory, suggesting you're mentally unstable or being influenced by others. And if none of that works, then either acceptance or a prolonged estrangement that could potentially end in litigation after your death, he said candidly, though I've made the documents as challenge-proof as possible. I nodded, appreciating his directness. And what would you advise as the best approach for me to take? Consistency, he said without hesitation. Maintain clear boundaries. Document all interactions. Be willing to listen, but not to capitulate. And most importantly, continue building the life you want outside of this relationship. The stronger your independent connections and purpose, the less power their rejection will have over you. After Harold left, I spent the afternoon in my garden, the repetitive actions of weeding and pruning, providing a meditative counterpoint to the morning's legal formalities. My phone remained off, a conscious choice to create space between yesterday's confrontation with Jennifer and whatever would come next. As the shadows lengthened across the lawn, I finally powered it on. Immediately, notifications filled the screen. 6 missed calls from Jennifer, 3 from Derek, multiple texts, and 2 voicemails. I scrolled through the texts first, watching the progression from thinly veiled anger to outright accusations. Mom, we need to talk about this immediately. Call me back. Derek's cousin says what you're doing could be considered elder financial abuse, but against US. This is outrageous. The school called about tuition for next year. What am I supposed to tell them? Are you seriously not answering your phone now? Real mature. Fine. The kids are asking about you. At least think about how this affects them. Mom, please. We can work this out. Just call me back. The voicemails continued this emotional roller coaster. The first, from Jennifer, was clipped and controlled. Mother, we need to discuss these financial changes immediately. This isn't just affecting Derek and me, it's impacting your grandchildren. Call me back today. The second, left an hour later, had abandoned all pretense of composure. Mom, please. I don't understand why you're doing this. We've always had an arrangement. You can't just change everything without warning. The kids are registered for next year already. The club has our names on events through December. Our vacation to Tuscany is booked for July. How are we supposed to manage all this? Please call me. We need to fix this. Amid this digital barrage was a single text from James. I hope today brings clarity and peace. Looking forward to Friday's symphony. Would you like to have dinner before the performance? J. The contrast between the two types of messages was stark. Jennifer's. Assuming entitlement and obligation, James is offering simple connection without demands. I responded to James first, accepting his dinner invitation with genuine pleasure, then steeled myself to call Jennifer. She answered on the first ring. Finally, where have you been all day? We've been trying to reach you for hours. I had meetings, I replied calmly, and then I spent some time in my garden. What can I do for you, Jennifer? What can you... She broke off, audibly gathering herself. Mom, we need to talk about these financial changes. Derek's cousin says... I'm not interested in Derek's cousin's legal opinions, I interrupted gently. If you've retained proper counsel, I'm happy to have Harold speak with them directly. We haven't retained counsel, she said, the phrase sounding awkward in her mouth. We're trying to understand why you've suddenly decided to upend our entire financial arrangement without warning. It wasn't sudden, Jennifer. It was the culmination of a pattern that's been developing for years. And you received a very clear warning yesterday. One day is not sufficient warning for changes of this magnitude. The kids' school tuition alone is over $50,000 a year. The country club dues are $32,000. Our household budget was structured around your contributions. I moved to my kitchen, putting the phone on speaker as I began assembling ingredients for dinner. I understand this requires adjustments on your part. That's why I'm honoring the school tuition through the end of this term, giving you time to plan for next year. Plan what? Her voice rose sharply. To pull the kids out of their school? To tell all our friends we can't afford the club anymore? To cancel the vacation we've been talking about for months? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I paused in slicing a red pepper, struck by her priorities. Not concern about making ends meet, but concern about appearances. Not worry about providing for her children's needs, but anxiety about maintaining a certain social image. Jennifer, I said carefully, you and Derek have a combined annual income that puts you in the top 5% of American households. You're not facing financial hardship. You're facing financial adjustment. That's easy for you to say. You have millions from Dad's life insurance and investments, plus your own retirement accounts. You don't have the expenses we do. Which expenses specifically? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. The mortgage on a house I helped you buy? Private schools I've been paying for? A country club membership I've maintained? What essential expenses are you referring to? A loaded silence followed. Then, in a voice that somehow managed to be both petulant and calculating, you know Derek is up for partner next year. We need to maintain certain appearances. His career depends on it. I see. I continued preparing my dinner, the rhythmic chopping oddly calming. And my financial support is essential to those appearances? Yes, that's what I've been trying to tell you. This isn't just about money. It's about our future, the kids' futures. Everything we've built could be compromised. Everything I've subsidized, you mean, I corrected gently. Another silence, longer this time. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice had dropped to a near whisper. Why are you doing this to us? What did we do to deserve this? The genuine bewilderment in her question stopped me. In her mind, my financial support wasn't a generous gift, but a parental obligation that I was now vindictively withdrawing. The disconnect in our perspectives was so fundamental, it was almost dizzying. This isn't punishment, Jennifer. It's a necessary rebalancing. For too long, I've enabled a dynamic where my value to you has been primarily financial. That's not healthy for either of us. That's not true. You're my mother, not my bank. But families help each other, don't they? You and Dad always said family comes first. Yes, families help each other, I agreed, sliding chopped vegetables into a pan with a satisfying sizzle. But help should flow in multiple directions. When was the last time you offered help to me? Not because I asked or because there was a crisis, but simply because you noticed a need or wanted to make my life easier. Silence again. I could almost see her searching her memory for examples and coming up empty. That's not fair, she said, finally, defaulting to her standard defense. You've never seemed to need anything. You're always so self-sufficient. Everyone needs connection, Jennifer. Everyone needs to feel valued for who they are, not what they provide. I've been as guilty as you in perpetuating this imbalance. I've used financial support as a substitute for requiring respect and reciprocity. So this is some sort of twisted life lesson? Forcing us into financial stress to teach us to appreciate you more? I sighed, realizing we were talking in circles. No, Jennifer. This is me making changes to create a healthier relationship. For all of us. The financial adjustments are necessary, but they're not the goal. They're the means to a more balanced connection. Well, it doesn't feel very healthy from where I'm standing, she retorted. It feels punitive and controlling. I understand. It might feel that way initially, I acknowledged. Change is rarely comfortable, especially when it affects established patterns. But I hope in time you'll see that this creates an opportunity for a more authentic relationship between us. What about the kids? She asked, shifting tactics. They don't understand why suddenly Grandma isn't helping with their school or coming to dinner. Emily asked just this morning when you're visiting next. The mention of my grandchildren tugged at my heart, as Jennifer knew it would. I would love to see Emily and Noah anytime. My issue has never been with them, and I hope you won't restrict my access to them as a way to express your displeasure with these changes. I would never do that, Jennifer said, sounding genuinely offended. But they pick up on tension, Mom. They know something's wrong. Then perhaps we should address that directly, I suggested. Would you bring them over for dinner this weekend? Saturday evening, perhaps? Just the three of you. Derek can have an evening to himself. The offer of time with the children, but without Derek, was deliberate. A small test to see if Jennifer was genuinely interested in repairing our relationship, or merely in reopening financial negotiations. She hesitated before answering. Saturday. I think that would work. Around 6? 6 would be perfect. I'll make lasagna, Noah's favorite. Okay. She sounded uncertain, caught between lingering anger and grudging engagement with my invitation. But Mom, we still need to figure out the financial situation. The school needs an answer about next year. The club is calling about the membership renewal. Those are decisions for you and Derek to make now, I said firmly. Based on your own financial priorities, not my checkbook. I've been clear about what support will continue and what won't. It's just so sudden, she said, her voice smaller now. We had no idea you were feeling this way. Perhaps that's part of the problem, I replied gently. That after all these years, you had no idea how I was feeling. Think about what that says about the attention we've been paying to each other. After we ended the call, I finished preparing my dinner, a simple stir-fry that Thomas had taught me to make during a cooking class we'd taken together in our 50s. As I ate at my kitchen island, I reflected on the conversation with Jennifer. There had been moments of genuine bewilderment that suggested she truly didn't understand the patterns that seemed so obvious to me. Was it possible that she had never questioned our dynamic because it was all she'd ever known? Thomas and I had given her everything, from the finest education to lavish weddings, 2 of them after the first marriage had lasted barely 18 months, to financial bailouts whenever she'd overspent. Had we created this sense of entitlement through our own actions, mistaking indulgence for love? If so, wasn't I partially responsible for the very dynamics I was now rejecting? These thoughts occupied me through the evening and into the next day as I attended a board meeting for the Oak Ridge Arts Council, where I'd served as treasurer since retiring. The mundane business of budgets and grant applications provided a welcome distraction from family complications, as did lunch afterward with 2 fellow board members who knew nothing of my personal situation. By mid-afternoon, I found myself with unexpected free time, a rare occurrence in my usually structured days. On impulse, I drove to Riverside Park, a sprawling green space along the Connecticut River where Thomas and I had often walked on summer evenings. The paths were quiet on a Thursday afternoon, just a few mothers with strollers and elderly couples enjoying the mild weather. I walked slowly, savoring the dappled sunlight and the gentle sound of water against the shoreline. Here, away from legal documents and heated conversations, I could think more clearly about what I hoped might emerge from these painful changes with Jennifer. Not estrangement. I had no desire to sever the relationship completely, but also not a return to the status quo, where my value was measured in dollars and my presence was a footnote to financial support. What I wanted was something more balanced, more authentic. A relationship where we each offered what we genuinely could and wanted to give, without obligation or resentment. Could such a transformation happen? Or had too many years of unhealthy patterns created a chasm too wide to bridge? Lost in thought, I nearly collided with a man rounding the bend in the path. James Bennett, dressed in running clothes, slightly out of breath. "Margaret!" he exclaimed, genuine pleasure lighting his face. "What a wonderful surprise!" "James," I replied, feeling an unexpected flutter of delight. "I didn't know you ran here." 3 times a week, weather permitting, he said, checking his watch before stopping the timer. Though running might be a generous description at my age. More like determined forward movement while trying not to think about my knees. I laughed, appreciating his self-deprecating humor. Well, you're doing better than most. I've always been more of a walker myself. Nothing wrong with that. He gestured to the path ahead. May I join you? I was about finished anyway, and walking sounds perfect for cooling down. Please do. We fell into step together, the initial surprise of our meeting giving way to comfortable conversation. James asked about my board meeting, listening with genuine interest as I described a proposed mural project for the city's underpass. I found myself explaining the budget negotiations with unexpected animation, realizing how long it had been since anyone had shown interest in the details of my volunteer work. You light up when you talk about the Arts Council, James observed as we paused at a scenic overlook of the river. It clearly means a great deal to you. It does, I acknowledged. Thomas and I always believed in the transformative power of arts education, especially for disadvantaged communities. The Council's scholarship program is sending 6 students to summer arts intensives this year, talented kids who otherwise couldn't afford the opportunity. Thomas sounds like a remarkable man, James said quietly. Elaine has mentioned how much you two accomplished together, professionally and philanthropically. He was, I agreed, feeling the familiar mix of pride and loss that always accompanied thoughts of my late husband. Brilliant in business, but never defined by it. He measured success by impact, not income. A rare perspective, James noted, and one you clearly share. We continued walking, the conversation shifting to the upcoming symphony concert and our mutual appreciation for Beethoven. There was an ease between us that I found both surprising and comforting. No need to impress or perform, just the simple pleasure of shared interests and comfortable silences. Have you ever been to Tanglewood? James asked as we completed our circuit of the park. The Boston Symphony's summer home in the Berkshires? Many times, I replied. Thomas and I used to make a weekend of it every summer. They're doing a Bernstein retrospective in August, he said, a touch of hesitancy entering his voice for the first time. I have tickets for the Saturday performance, with Sunday brunch at the Mount, Edith Wharton's estate. I'd been planning to go alone, but I'd be delighted if you'd consider joining me. It's a beautiful drive, and there's a charming inn nearby where we could stay. He paused, then added quickly, separate rooms, of course. I'm not presuming anything. The invitation for an overnight trip, albeit with careful boundaries, represented a significant step beyond dinner or a local concert. A small voice in my head questioned whether I was ready for such a development when my family situation remained so unsettled. But a stronger voice, one that sounded remarkably like Thomas, urged me not to put my life on hold waiting for problems, to resolve themselves completely. That sounds wonderful, I said, making the decision almost before I realized it. I haven't been to Tanglewood since Thomas died. It would be lovely to return. James's smile was worth any uncertainty the decision might have caused. Excellent. I'll make all the arrangements, though I'd welcome your input on the inn. I've heard the Wheatley is exceptional, but you may know the area better than I do. The Wheatley is lovely, I confirmed. But there's a smaller place, Stonover Farm, that has the most charming suites in a converted barn. Thomas and I always stayed there. Stonover Farm it is, then, James said decisively. I'll call for reservations tomorrow, and Margaret... He hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. Thank you for being willing to create new memories in a place that clearly holds significant ones with Thomas. That can't be easy. His perceptiveness touched me deeply. Few people understood the complex geography of grief, how certain places, songs, even foods became simultaneously precious and painful, laden with memories that both comforted and wounded. Thomas would approve, I said simply. He always said life was for the living. We reached my car, and James insisted on walking me to the driver's side door. though his own vehicle was apparently in the opposite direction. As we said our goodbyes, confirming plans for tomorrow's symphony, he leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on my cheek. Brief, respectful, but undeniably intentional. "Until tomorrow," he said, stepping back with a warm smile. "Until tomorrow," I echoed, aware of a gentle flush rising to my face, a sensation I hadn't experienced in decades. As I drove home, I found myself humming along to the radio, something I rarely did when driving alone. The day's unexpected encounter had left me feeling strangely buoyant, despite the ongoing tensions with Jennifer and the significant changes I'd initiated in my financial and estate arrangements. Perhaps this was what Harold had meant about building a life outside the complicated dynamics with my daughter, finding connections and purposes that existed independently of family tensions, creating an identity not defined by maternal sacrifice or financial support, but by genuine interests and reciprocal relationships. Upon reaching home, I was surprised to find a sleek black BMW in my driveway, Derek's car. My son-in-law sat on my front steps, his normally impeccable appearance slightly rumpled, as if he'd come straight from the office without his usual attention to detail. He stood as I parked, his expression a careful mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Margaret," he greeted me, using my first name as he always had. A small but telling difference from Jennifer, who had never stopped calling me Mom, even when she treated me more like a financial resource than a mother. "Derek," I replied evenly, gathering my purse and the small bag of groceries I'd picked up on the way home. "This is unexpected." "I thought we should talk," he said, moving to take the grocery bag from me, a gesture of chivalry that would have seemed more genuine if it hadn't been our first interaction since I'd canceled their country club membership. "Jennifer is distraught about your recent decisions. I thought perhaps I could offer a more objective perspective." I unlocked the front door, gesturing for him to follow me inside. "By all means. Would you like some coffee? Tea?" "Coffee would be great," he said, following me to the kitchen where he placed the grocery bag on the counter. "Black, if you don't mind." I went through the motions of preparing coffee, giving myself time to assess Derek's likely approach. Unlike Jennifer's emotional appeals, Derek would frame this as a rational business discussion, his preferred territory as a corporate attorney. He would present logical arguments, financial projections, perhaps even legal precedents. "So," I said as I placed a mug of coffee before him and took a seat across the kitchen island, "you wanted to talk." Derek took a careful sip before setting down his cup and leaning forward slightly. "Margaret, I understand that you're upset about the birthday dinner. Jennifer handled that poorly, and we both acknowledge that. But these financial changes seem disproportionate to the offense." Just as I'd expected, framing the issue as a simple reaction to a single incident, rather than a response to years of accumulating disregard. I kept my expression neutral as I replied. "This isn't about one missed dinner, Derek. It's about recognizing and correcting patterns that have developed over years. Patterns that have become increasingly unhealthy for all of us." He nodded as if he'd anticipated this response. "I can appreciate that perspective, but surely there's a middle ground between maintaining the status quo and such drastic changes? The children's education, for instance, pulling them from Westfield midstream could be deeply disruptive to their academic and social development." "I'm not pulling them from anywhere," I pointed out. "I'm honoring the commitment through the end of this term, giving you and Jennifer nearly 6 months to make alternative arrangements. That might mean adjusting your household budget to accommodate the tuition yourselves, or it might mean transitioning them to the excellent public schools in your district. That's a parental decision for you both to make." Derek's expression flickered briefly before settling back into concerned reasonableness. "Of course, and we appreciate the transition period. But Jennifer mentioned you're also making changes to your estate plan? Something about a foundation?" I studied Derek carefully, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders despite his practiced relaxed posture. So Jennifer had told him about the foundation. I wondered how much else she had shared about our recent conversations. Yes, I confirmed, seeing no reason to be evasive. I'm establishing the Thomas and Margaret Wilson Foundation for Education, Arts, and Medical Research. It will be the primary beneficiary of my estate. Derek's expression remained carefully neutral, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his coffee mug. I see. And may I ask what prompted this decision? Estate foundations are typically established for much larger fortunes. Tech billionaires, hedge fund managers. Your estate, while certainly substantial, might not warrant such a structure from a tax efficiency standpoint. The attorney in him was surfacing, trying to frame my deeply personal decision as a potentially misguided financial strategy, rather than a deliberate reallocation of resources. The foundation isn't about tax efficiency, Derek, I replied evenly. It's about legacy. Thomas and I always intended to direct a significant portion of our assets to causes we believed in. The foundation simply formalizes that intention. Of course, and that's admirable, he said, shifting tactics smoothly. But traditionally, family foundations include family members in leadership positions. It creates continuity across generations, ensures the founder's values are preserved. Jennifer would be a natural choice to eventually assume a leadership role. Jennifer will have a seat on the board, I confirmed, but she won't control the foundation's assets or decision-making unilaterally. Derek set down his mug with deliberate care. Margaret, may I speak frankly? I would expect nothing less. These changes feel like they're coming from a place of hurt rather than careful consideration. The birthday dinner was an unfortunate oversight on our part, and Jennifer's reaction when you confronted her was admittedly defensive. But restructuring your entire estate in response seems extreme. I almost smiled at his careful framing, an unfortunate oversight, rather than another example in a long pattern of dismissal, and extreme changes that threatened his family's financial expectations. Derek, I've had 35 years of experience making multi-million-dollar financial decisions for one of the country's largest investment firms. Do you really believe I would restructure my estate based on an emotional reaction to a single canceled dinner? He had the grace to look slightly abashed. No, of course not. I didn't mean to suggest. But you did suggest exactly that, I interrupted gently. Because it's easier to dismiss these changes as an emotional overreaction than to consider that they might be the result of years of careful observation and growing clarity about certain patterns in our family dynamic. Derek leaned back slightly, reassessing his approach, the attorney giving way to the negotiator. What exactly are these patterns you've observed, Margaret? Because from our perspective, we've been part of a normal, loving family relationship. Yes, we've accepted your financial assistance over the years, but that's not unusual in families of means. Many parents help their adult children maintain a certain lifestyle, especially when grandchildren are involved. Financial assistance isn't inherently problematic, I agreed. It's the context around it that concerns me. When financial support becomes an expectation rather than a gift, when it's not accompanied by basic consideration and reciprocity, it creates an unhealthy dynamic for everyone involved. Reciprocity, Derek repeated, as if testing the word. What form of reciprocity were you expecting that we failed to provide? The question seemed genuine, which gave me pause. Was it possible that Derek, like Jennifer, truly didn't understand what I found so troubling about our interactions? Respect for my time, I began carefully. Inclusion in family events unless there's a genuine conflict, not just a more appealing option. Interest in my life beyond what I can provide financially. Basic courtesies like advance notice when plans change, acknowledgement of special occasions without prompting. Consideration of my preferences rather than just your own convenience. Derek was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. something between surprise and calculation. "Those all seem like reasonable expectations," he said finally. "And if we've fallen short in those areas, I can understand your frustration. But isn't there a more direct way to address these concerns than withdrawing financial support and rewriting your will? It feels like you're using money as leverage to force behavioral changes." "I see it differently," I replied, rising to refill my coffee cup, using the movement to gather my thoughts. "I'm not using money as leverage. I'm recognizing that financial support without healthy boundaries has enabled patterns that aren't serving any of us well. Breaking that financial dependence is necessary to create space for a more balanced relationship to develop." Derek shifted in his seat, his lawyer's instinct for finding weaknesses in an argument visibly at work. "But isn't it possible that removing financial support will create resentment rather than a healthier dynamic? Jennifer is already hurt and confused by what she perceives as a sudden rejection." "That's certainly a risk," I acknowledged, returning to my seat. "But continuing as we were guaranteed the perpetuation of unhealthy patterns. At least this way, there's a possibility for genuine change." Derek studied me for a long moment, then sighed, dropping some of his careful facade. "This is really happening, isn't it? You're not going to reconsider or negotiate a compromise?" "The foundation is non-negotiable," I said firmly, "as are the modified trusts for the grandchildren. I remain open to discussion about how we structure our personal relationship moving forward, but those financial decisions are final." He nodded slowly, accepting the reality, if not the reasoning behind it. "Jennifer isn't going to take this well." "I know," I said quietly, "but I hope that in time, she'll understand that this creates an opportunity for something more authentic between us." Derek finished his coffee and stood, straightening his suit jacket with an automatic gesture. "I should get back to the office. Thank you for being direct with me, Margaret. While I can't say I'm pleased with these developments, I do appreciate your clarity." As I walked him to the door, he paused on the threshold. "For what it's worth, I understand your position better than Jennifer does. My own parents were transactional in their affection, critical when I failed to meet expectations, generous when I performed well. It creates a certain lens through which you view relationships." The unexpected personal disclosure caught me off guard. In 12 years, Derek had rarely spoken about his family beyond the most superficial details. "Thank you for sharing that, Derek," I said, genuinely touched by this glimpse of vulnerability. "That can't have been easy growing up." It taught me to see relationships as negotiations, identifying what the other person wants and providing it in exchange for what I need. A shadow crossed his face. "Not the healthiest foundation for intimacy, as my first marriage proved. With Jennifer, I've tried to do better, but old patterns persist." "They do," I agreed softly. "For all of us." He nodded once more, then turned to go. "I'll talk to Jennifer. Try to help her understand your perspective. I can't promise she'll come around quickly, but I'll do what I can to keep the lines of communication open." "I appreciate that," I said, watching as he walked to his car with the measured stride of someone carrying an unwelcome responsibility. After Derek left, I stood for a long moment in my doorway, absorbing the unexpected turn our conversation had taken. Beneath his polished exterior and calculating approach, there was perhaps more awareness of unhealthy family dynamics than I had given him credit for. Whether that awareness would translate into meaningful change remained to be seen, but it offered a glimmer of hope I hadn't anticipated. The rest of the day passed quietly. I attended to household tasks, spoke briefly with Sarah Reynolds about some minor adjustments to my investment portfolio, and prepared for my evening with James the following night. The symphony had always been one of my favorite indulgences. I selected a deep burgundy dress that I had purchased last year but never worn, relieved that it still fit perfectly. That night, I found myself unexpectedly restless. sleep elusive, despite the emotional and mental exertion of the day. Around midnight, I abandoned the attempt, wrapping myself in the cashmere throw Thomas had given me for our last Christmas together, and settling into the window seat in my bedroom that overlooked the garden. The three-quarter moon bathed the flowering shrubs in silver light, creating an almost otherworldly landscape. I thought about the changes of the past few days, not just the legal and financial restructuring, but the subtle shifts in my own sense of self. There was a growing certainty in my decisions, a reclaiming of the confident executive I had been in my professional life, but had somehow misplaced in my family relationships. I thought of Jennifer as a child, bright, curious, occasionally willful, but fundamentally loving. When had that loving child transformed into a woman who measured relationships primarily by what she could extract from them? Was it during her tumultuous 20s when Thomas and I had repeatedly stepped in to solve financial and emotional crises? Or earlier, in the competitive pressure cooker of the private schools we'd chosen, where social status and material possessions defined one's place in the hierarchy? Had Thomas and I, in our determination to give her every advantage, inadvertently taught her that love equaled indulgence and that relationships were measured in material terms? If so, was it fair to resent the harvest of seeds we ourselves had planted? These questions circled in my mind until the first pale light of dawn began to erase the moon's silvery landscape. I finally drifted into a light sleep, waking a few hours later feeling surprisingly refreshed despite the abbreviated rest. Friday passed in a pleasant blur of anticipation for the evening ahead. I had my hair trimmed at the salon I had patronized for years, indulged in a manicure, and even purchased a new fragrance. Small rituals of self-care that I had often neglected in recent years. James arrived precisely at 6, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit with a subtle burgundy tie that somehow complemented my dress perfectly. He presented me with a small, elegantly wrapped box. "I know it's a few days late," he said as I invited him in, "but I wanted to acknowledge your birthday properly." "You didn't need to bring a gift," I protested, genuinely surprised. "Dinner and the symphony are more than enough." "It's nothing elaborate," he assured me. "Just something that made me think of you when I saw it." Inside the box, nestled, on a bed of tissue paper, was a delicate silver bookmark inlaid with lapis lazuli in a pattern reminiscent of the kintsugi pottery I'd admired at the gallery. Engraved on the back were the words, "For Margaret, may each new chapter bring wisdom and joy." "It's beautiful," I said, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you, James." "You're very welcome," he replied, a pleased smile, warming his expression. "I noticed you're always reading something substantial whenever I see you. Proper books, not those electronic devices everyone stares at constantly." "A lifelong habit," I acknowledged. Thomas used to tease me that I'd need a separate moving truck just for my library whenever we relocated. "A man after my own heart," James said. Catherine was the same way. Our compromise was that for every new book that entered the house, an old one had to go to the library donation bin. It was the only way to prevent being completely overtaken by literature. We shared a smile of mutual understanding before heading out to dinner at Orsini's, a small Italian restaurant known for its perfect balance of elegant ambiance and unpretentious food. Conversation flowed easily over plates of handmade pasta and a bottle of excellent Barolo that James had selected with knowledgeable care. "To new beginnings," he toasted, raising his glass, "and the courage they require." "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass gently against his. As we enjoyed our meal, James shared stories of his architectural career, the challenges of balancing artistic vision with practical constraints, the satisfaction of seeing buildings take shape from initial sketches, the occasional battles with clients who wanted to compromise structural integrity for aesthetic whims. There was one particularly memorable venture capitalist, he recalled with a wry smile, who insisted his corporate headquarters needed a cantilevered conference room, suspended over a koi pond. No supports visible, mind you. The room should appear to float above the water. When I explained the engineering challenges and additional costs, he just kept saying, "If I'm paying for it, you can make it happen." As if physics could be negotiated, like a business deal. "Did you make it happen?" I asked, intrigued. "In a manner of speaking. We designed an ingenious support system disguised within a sculptural installation that appeared to be part of the landscaping. It cost him an additional $300,000, but he got his floating conference room. Last I heard, he conducts all his most intimidating negotiations there, watching his opponents try to focus while worrying the floor might collapse beneath them." I laughed, enjoying his storytelling as much as the tale itself. Psychological warfare through architecture. Impressive. "Architecture always reflects the personalities of those who commission it," James observed. "The truly interesting clients are those who allow the building to reveal something authentic about themselves, rather than just projecting an image they think will impress others." "That's insightful," I said, struck by the parallel to my own situation with Jennifer and Derek. "I think the same could be said about many aspects of life. How we spend our resources often reveals what we truly value, beyond what we claim to prioritize." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Financial choices are particularly revealing. In my practice, I often saw families fight bitterly over inheritances or business assets, exposing relationship dynamics that had been carefully concealed for years. Did you ever find yourself in the middle of those disputes?" I asked, curious about his experiences. "More often than I'd have liked," he admitted. "Commercial architecture frequently involves family businesses where different generations have conflicting visions. The patriarch wants a traditional building that reflects stability and heritage. The children want something modern and sustainable that speaks to the future." "And how did you navigate those conflicts?" "By asking questions rather than providing immediate solutions," he said. "What values does this building need to express? What legacy do you want it to create? What function must it serve beyond the obvious?" The best designs emerged when families found common ground in their answers, even if their initial visions seemed incompatible. There was wisdom in his approach that resonated with my current family challenges. Perhaps the solution wasn't choosing between maintaining financial support or establishing boundaries, but finding the common values that could create a healthier relationship structure for the future. Our conversation continued through dessert and coffee, ranging from favorite travel destinations to books that had shaped our worldviews. By the time we arrived at the Symphony Hall, I felt a deepening connection with James, not just the pleasure of compatible companionship, but the rarer satisfaction of intellectual and emotional resonance. The Beethoven performance was magnificent, the orchestra bringing fresh energy to the familiar Seventh Symphony. I found myself completely immersed in the music, occasionally aware of James beside me, his profile illuminated by the subtle stage lighting, his hand resting comfortably near, mine on the shared armrest. During the particularly moving allegretto, he gently covered my hand with his, a gesture so natural and unobtrusive that it felt like an extension of the music itself, another layer of harmony in an already perfect composition. After the performance, as we walked through the crowded lobby toward the exit, a voice called out from behind us. "Margaret? Margaret Wilson?" I turned to find Caroline Hartley, a former colleague from Harrington Financial and a longtime patron of the symphony. She approached with quick steps, elegant as always in a tailored suit, despite being well into her 70s. "I thought that was you," she said warmly, embracing me with the continental kiss on both cheeks she had adopted during her years managing the firm's European division. "It's been ages. You're looking wonderful." "Thank you, Caroline. So are you. Caroline, this is James Bennett. James, Caroline Hartley. We worked together at Harrington for nearly 20 years. "A pleasure," James said, shaking her hand with a warm smile. "Likewise," Caroline replied, giving me a subtle but approving glance before returning her attention to our conversation. Are you still on the Arts Council board? I saw the announcement about the new mural project. Very impressive fundraising. In this economic climate. Yes, I'm serving as treasurer this term. The mural project has been a labor of love for the entire board. You must tell me all about it, Caroline insisted. Are you free for lunch next week? Tuesday, perhaps. The club at Oak Ridge still does that magnificent crab salad you always ordered. The mention of the Oak Ridge Country Club, the very membership I had recently canceled for Jennifer and Derek, created a momentary awkwardness. I'm not a member at Oak Ridge anymore, I said simply. But I'd love to have lunch. Perhaps at the Garden Bistro downtown? If Caroline was surprised by my changed membership status, she didn't show it. The Garden Bistro would be perfect. Shall we say noon on Tuesday? After confirming the details and exchanging a few more pleasantries, Caroline departed with a knowing smile and a whispered, "He's very handsome, Margaret." Well done. That brought an unexpected flush to my cheeks. She seems delightful, James commented as we continued toward the exit. I gather you had quite the impressive career before retirement? I was chief financial officer at Harrington for the last 15 years before retiring, I explained. Nothing particularly glamorous. Managing investment strategies, overseeing acquisitions, navigating regulatory challenges. Caroline ran our European operations from London. We worked closely on several major projects. You're being modest, James observed with a smile. CFO of a Fortune 500 company is hardly nothing particularly glamorous. It's remarkable. His genuine admiration, without a hint of intimidation or competitiveness, was refreshing. So many men of our generation had been conditioned to view accomplished women as threatening, but James seemed to find my professional success appealing rather than challenging. What was your favorite part of the work? He asked as we reached his car. Not the title or achievements, but the day-to-day elements that brought you satisfaction? The question was unexpected and thoughtful. I considered it carefully as we drove through the nighttime streets of Oak Ridge, the city lights creating patterns of illumination and shadow. The problem solving, I said finally. Taking a complex financial challenge with dozens of variables and finding the optimal solution. One that considered not just immediate profit, but long-term sustainability and human impact. That moment when all the pieces aligned into a cohesive strategy. There's nothing quite like it. James nodded. That resonates with the architectural process as well. Finding the perfect balance between form and function, beauty and practicality, innovation and stability. When it works, it feels almost like magic, doesn't it? As if you've tapped into some underlying order in the universe. Exactly, I agreed, struck by his understanding. Thomas used to say that good business decisions felt like discovering something that already existed, rather than creating something new, like mathematicians finding rather than inventing theorems. Your husband sounds like he was a remarkable man, James said quietly. I wish I could have known him. The simple sincerity of his statement touched me deeply. There was no jealousy or insecurity in his acknowledgement of Thomas's continued importance in my life, just genuine appreciation for the person who had shaped so much of who I was. He would have liked you, I said with certainty. He always valued straightforward people who didn't waste time on pretense. When we arrived at my home, James walked me to the door as he had after our previous evening together. The night was clear and cool, the spring air fragrant with blooming lilacs from my garden. Thank you for a wonderful evening, I said, genuinely, reluctant for it to end. The symphony was magnificent. It was, he agreed. Though I must confess, I found myself occasionally distracted from Beethoven's genius by the company beside me. The compliment, delivered without artifice, brought a warm smile to my face. Likewise. James took a half-step closer, his expression open and questioning. Margaret, I'd very much like to kiss you goodnight, if that would be welcome. His Directness was so refreshing. No games, no assumptions, just clear communication and respect for boundaries. I found myself nodding before I'd consciously decided to do so. "That would be very welcome," I replied softly. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to reconsider, then pressed his lips gently against mine. The kiss was tender, but not tentative, appreciative without being demanding, a perfect reflection of the man himself. When we parted, I felt a fluttering sensation I hadn't experienced in decades, a giddy lightness that belonged to a much younger woman than my 63 years would suggest. "Good night, Margaret," James said, a gentle smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I'll call you tomorrow." "Good night, James." As I entered my home and closed the door behind me, I leaned against it for a moment, absorbing the experiences of the evening, the magnificent music, the stimulating conversation, the unexpected kiss. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt a genuine excitement about romantic possibilities, a reminder that my life still held potential for new connections and unexpected joy. The pleasant reverie was interrupted by the blinking light on my answering machine. Despite rarely using the landline anymore, I had maintained it primarily for emergencies. The red light indicated multiple messages. I pressed play with a sense of foreboding. Jennifer's voice filled the room, tight with barely controlled emotion. "Mom, it's me. Derek told me about your conversation. I can't believe you're really going through with this foundation idea. Please call me back. We need to talk before things go too far to fix." The second message, left an hour later, had a sharper edge. "Mom, I'm trying to be understanding, but you're not making this easy. The school called again about next year's enrollment. Derek thinks we should start looking at public schools as a contingency. Do you have any idea how disruptive this would be for Emily and Noah? Please call me back." The third message, from just 30 minutes ago, revealed a different approach. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about reciprocity and consideration. I realize we haven't always been as attentive as we should have been. The kids and I will be there tomorrow at 6 as planned. I'm bringing your favorite lemon tart from Marconi's. I hope we can start fresh. Love you." I stood listening to the progression of messages, noting the journey from disbelief to anger to strategic accommodation. The mention of the lemon tart, which had been Thomas's favorite, not mine, was a telling detail. Jennifer was making an effort, but it was still orchestrated for effect rather than stemming from genuine understanding. Tomorrow's dinner would be revealing. Would Jennifer come alone with the children as I had suggested, or would Derek accompany them despite my specific invitation? Would the conversation focus on rebuilding our personal relationship, or would it eventually circle back to financial concerns? Would the children be used as emotional leverage to soften my resolve? Despite these questions, I found myself looking forward to seeing Emily and Noah. Whatever complications existed in my relationship with their parents, my love for my grandchildren remained uncomplicated and unconditional. They deserved a grandmother who was present and engaged, not just a distant figure who provided financial benefits. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the stark contrast between my evening with James and the anticipated complexity of tomorrow's family dinner. One relationship was developing organically, based on mutual interest and genuine connection. The other was struggling to find new footing after years of imbalance. Could both relationships flourish in this new landscape I was creating? Or would the necessary changes in my family dynamic ultimately preclude the possibility of authentic reconciliation? Only time would tell. What was certain was that I was no longer willing to accept scraps of attention in exchange for financial support. Whether Jennifer truly understood this fundamental shift remained to be seen, but her awareness that change was necessary, even if initially motivated by financial concerns, represented a potential starting point for something healthier. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself mentally rehearsing how I would explain these complex adult dynamics to Emily and Noah if they asked why things were changing between Grandma and their parents. How could I convey the importance of mutual respect and consideration without casting their parents in a negative light? How could I maintain my place in their lives if Jennifer and Derek decided to restrict access out of resentment over financial changes? These questions followed me into uneasy dreams, where family dinners transformed into corporate boardrooms and balance sheets listed emotional debits and credits alongside financial figures. Throughout these unsettling dreamscapes, the image of the kintsugi bowl recurred, broken, repaired with gold, and ultimately stronger at the mended places than it had been before the breaking. Perhaps that image held the hope for what might eventually emerge from this painful period of fracture and reconstruction in my family relationships. Not a perfect restoration of what had been, but something new. A relationship where the lines of repair were visible reminders of what had been broken, but also evidence of the care taken in mending what was valuable enough to save. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.